Picture this. It's 4 in the morning, still pitch black, freezing cold, and you're walking barefoot down a stone path toward a river you can barely see. All around you, dozens of people are doing the exact same thing, in total silence, eyes half closed, with sleep. Nobody's talking. The only sound is water moving over rock. And when you finally reach the bank, without hesitating, you wade in up to your chest into ice-cold water. You're not bathing. You're not cooling off. You're doing something millions of people across completely different cultures, separated by oceans and thousands of years, all decided to do too. Submerge themselves in water to start over. This could be the Ganges in India. It could be a Christian baptism in the Jordan River. It could be a Jewish mikvah in Jerusalem, or a Shinto purification ritual outside a temple in Japan. And here's where you, like me, have probably thought at some point. What a strange coincidence that so many religions, with zero contact with each other, landed on the exact same idea. Stick around to the end of this video, and you'll understand why that coincidence isn't really a coincidence at all, and why you're probably repeating that same gesture every single morning without even realizing it the second you step into the shower. Yes, that ancient ritual is likely hiding inside your daily routine, and you never even noticed. Let's start with the obvious part, even though obvious is rarely as simple as it looks. Water cleans. We all know that. Get your hands dirty, you wash them. It's basic survival logic, something even the most primitive ancient society understood perfectly well. No labs or microscopes required. But here's the interesting part. Almost no major religion stopped at that hygienic logic. They took it for granted and built something much bigger on top of it. Water stopped being just a tool for physical cleaning and became a tool for spiritual cleaning. And that leap from "I'm washing my body" to "I'm washing my soul" is the real mystery we're untangling today. Let's start with Judaism, since it's a solid chronological starting point. The mikvah, that Jewish ritual bath, shows up in detail in texts like Leviticus, one of the oldest books of the Torah, compiled sometime between the 6th and 5th centuries BC, though based on oral traditions that go back much further. In Leviticus, dunking in water isn't about washing off the day's grime. It's about moving from a state of ritual impurity, called tumah, to a state of purity, called tahara. And here's the first twist you probably didn't see coming. Ancient Judaism considered things impure that would seem completely normal to us today, like touching a dead body, having contact with certain skin conditions, or even natural biological processes like menstruation or childbirth. These weren't dirty acts in a moral sense. They were moments of contact with the fragility of human life, with mortality, and water was the ritual bridge back into the world of the living, so to speak. Archaeologists like Ronny Reich, a specialist in ancient Jerusalem, have documented dozens of mikvaot, ritual baths carved into stone, dating back to the Second Temple period, roughly between the 1st century BC and 70 AD. More than 150 have been found in Jerusalem alone. That tells us something important. This wasn't an occasional symbolic whim. It was religious infrastructure as serious as any temple. People built these baths with the same level of commitment they put into building synagogues. And that brings us to another point on the map: early Christianity, which grows directly out of that Jewish context. When John the Baptist submerges people in the Jordan River, according to the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he's not inventing something out of thin air. He's taking that Jewish tradition of ritual purification and turning it into a one-time rite, not repeated, that marks a permanent shift in a person's spiritual identity. Early Christian baptism wasn't a spa day. It was a declaration of war on your old life. You literally went under, and when you came back up, in theory, you weren't the same person anymore. But what if I told you this exact same logic, symbolic death and rebirth, shows up thousands of miles away with zero direct historical connection? Let's talk about India and Hinduism specifically, because this is where things get even more interesting. For Hindus, the Ganges isn't just any river. It's the goddess Ganga in physical form, and bathing in her waters, according to the Vedic texts, the oldest in Hindu tradition, composed somewhere between 1500 and 500 BC, doesn't just purify you, it can help free your soul from the cycle of reincarnation, samsara. Every year, millions of people take part in the Kumbh Mela, considered the largest religious gathering on the planet, where pilgrims submerge themselves in sacred rivers on dates calculated with astrological precision. We're talking about events where, according to estimates from Indian authorities, more than 100 million people have gathered during a single festival period, 100 million people getting into the water at basically the same time. Next time you're annoyed about the checkout line at the grocery store, keep that in mind. Now here's where it gets weird, because you might think, okay, maybe Hinduism and Judaism had some indirect cultural contact. Trade routes, exchange, who knows? That's a reasonable theory. But then we get to Japanese Shinto, a tradition that developed almost entirely in isolation on an island chain, and we run into the exact same idea. The ritual is called misogi, and it involves purifying yourself under cold water, often a waterfall, to wash away kegare, a kind of spiritual contamination that doesn't necessarily mean you did something wrong, just that you came into contact with death, illness, or disorder. The founding myth appears in the Kojiki, the oldest text in Japanese mythology, written in 712 AD, where the god Izanagi purifies himself in the sea after visiting the land of the dead, and several major Shinto deities are born from that purification, including Amaterasu, the sun goddess. Notice the pattern? Contact with death, purification by water, symbolic rebirth. Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Shinto, and we haven't even gotten to Islam yet, where wudu, the ritual washing before each prayer, is laid out with extremely specific instructions in the Quran, in Surah Al-Ma'idah, and where ghusl, a full-body purification, is performed after certain major life events. Or Buddhism, where temples in Kyoto still have purification fountains called chozuya, where visitors rinse their hands and mouths before approaching sacred ground. So here we land on the question you're probably already asking. Why? Why did cultures that never had any contact with each other arrive at the exact same spiritual conclusion, using the exact same physical element? And this is where most videos on the internet give you some watered-down answer, like, because water is magical, or because there's some universal spiritual connection between all religions. But let's tear that assumption apart, because the real answer is a lot more interesting, and honestly, a lot more human. Anthropologists like Mircea Eliade, one of the most influential historians of religion of the 20th century, proposed an explanation that actually holds up. In his book, The Sacred and the Profane, published in 1957, Eliade argues that water works as a universal symbol precisely because its actual physical behavior, not its religious meaning, its observable physical behavior, is identical everywhere on the planet. Water dissolves things. Water erases footprints. Water carries dirt away. Any human being, in any era, on any continent can observe that phenomenon without anyone explaining it to them. You don't need a prophet to tell you water cleans. You can see it with your own eyes every time you wash a dish. So, what happened, according to this theory, wasn't one religion copying an idea from another, and it wasn't some simultaneous divine revelation happening in different corners of the world. What happened is something anthropology calls convergent cultural evolution. Different societies facing the same universal human problem. How do you symbolically deal with guilt, death, illness, sin, impurity, using the same physical tool available to literally everyone, arrived independently at almost identical symbolic solutions? It's a lot like two civilizations separated by an ocean with no contact whatsoever, both inventing the wheel on their own. Nobody copied anybody. Given the same problem and the same physics of the world, some solutions are just close to inevitable. But here's the twist I want to leave you with, because this isn't just about the ancient world. It's about you, right now, in the 21st century. Think about your own routine. How many times have you jumped in the shower after a terrible day, not because you were actually physically dirty, but because you felt like you needed to wash something off? How many times has someone told you, "I just need a shower to clear my head," after bad news? That impulse, that everyday, modern, seemingly totally secular gesture, is the exact same impulse that drove a Jewish priest 3,000 years ago to submerge himself in a mikvah, or a Hindu pilgrim to bathe in the Ganges. The only difference is we don't put a religious label on it anymore. But the gesture is still there, hiding inside our daily routine, disguised as simple hygiene. And there's another piece of the puzzle worth mentioning because it adds real scientific weight to this whole story. A study in psychology published by Zhong and Katie Liljenquist in the journal Science in 2006 found something they called the Macbeth effect, a nod to the Shakespeare play where Lady Macbeth obsessively tries to wash her hands after committing a crime. In their experiments, Zhong and Liljenquist found that people who recalled doing something morally questionable showed a measurable, not just symbolic, but actual behavioral urge to physically clean themselves, even when there was no real dirt involved at all. In other words, there's something in the human brain that genuinely links moral cleanliness with physical cleanliness. It's not just a nice metaphor ancient priests made up. It's apparently wired into how we process guilt. So next time you take a shower after a rough day, technically you're taking part, without even realizing it, in one of the oldest, most universal rituals in human history. Congratulations, you're now part of an ancient tradition, and you didn't even have to go on a pilgrimage to earn it. Now, let's circle back for a second, because there are some important distinctions between these traditions worth pointing out before we wrap up. Not all water purification means exactly the same thing. In Judaism and Islam, immersion is usually tied to a temporary state of impurity that gets resolved and then repeats every time the situation comes up again. It's cyclical. Christianity, on the other hand, traditionally treats baptism as a one-time, unrepeatable event that marks a clear before and after. In Hinduism, bathing in the Ganges can happen over and over throughout your whole life, but each dip carries the symbolic weight of getting one step closer to the soul's final liberation. And in Shinto, misogi is so woven into everyday life that many practitioners treat it as a regular spiritual discipline, not just something reserved for moments of crisis. These differences matter because they remind us of something we tend to forget when comparing religions. Just because traditions share a symbol doesn't mean that symbol means the exact same thing to all of them. Water is the vehicle, but what each tradition loads into that vehicle, its theology, its worldview, its whole understanding of sin or impurity, is deeply different and deserves to be understood on its own terms, not flattened into some generic, all religions are basically the same underneath explanation. And maybe that's the real takeaway hiding behind this whole mystery. Not that there's some secret spiritual code shared by all of humanity waiting to be cracked like a religious conspiracy theory, but something simpler and honestly more moving. That human beings in any era, anywhere on earth, facing the same questions. What do I do with my guilt? How do I start over? How do I let go of what's weighing on me? Kept reaching for the same physical gesture available to absolutely everyone because they didn't need to invent anything new. The water was already there, dissolving, carrying things away, cleaning, exactly the same in the Jordan River as in the Ganges. Exactly the same 3,000 years ago as it was this morning when you turned on your shower. So let's go back to that scene from the beginning. You in the dark, walking toward the cold water, surrounded by people you've never met, but who are doing exactly what you're doing. Maybe you've never literally stood on a riverbank before sunrise. But somehow, every time you feel that need to start fresh, to leave something heavy behind, and you end up standing under your own shower with your eyes closed a second longer than you need to, you're repeating, without even knowing it, a gesture that runs through the entire history of humanity. You don't need a sacred river. You don't need a temple. Sometimes all it takes is the quiet of a bathroom and the sound of water falling to understand, even just for a moment, why so many different civilizations, with no knowledge of each other, all decided that water was the right place to leave something behind and begin again. If this one got you thinking, the way it got me thinking while I researched it, you know what to do with that button down below, before the water carries off the memory of you watching this too. And if you want to keep digging up these mysteries that connect all of humanity more than we realize, I'll be right here, whenever the algorithm decides to bring you back.